Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today we're doing a special podcast episode with Kari Hohne. Hello, Kari. Welcome.
Hi, Susan. It's very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you too. And I was looking at your work, and it seems like you work with archetypes and dream symbolism and interpretation and tarot. And I saw some I Ching there. And then you have a new book coming out called Decoding the Night Sky, which is about Babylonian astrology. So you have a really rich background.
Yeah, I do a lot of archetype and symbol exploration, which is why, I kind of look at all the Eastern, Western archetypes and oracles and dreams. I've been working with dreams for like a long time, decades, but I've done some translations of the I Ching, the Tao Te Ching. I've written about dreams, but yeah, my newest book it looks at Babylonian astrology. It's a lot older. It goes back to 2500 BC as opposed to 500 AD or whenever the Greeks were kind of homogenizing it. So it has it's much richer in its original meaning, the different signs, and also it explores some of the ideas that there's some glyphs that we find in Göbekli Tepe and Ratnagiri that go back 10,000 to 10,000 BC. So it's kind of it was a really, I love writing things that are just it kind of takes on its own life, and it was really fun to put together.
Oh, I bet. So with these symbols in the Babylonian astrology, is it the 12 signs like we know it, or is it more than that? Are they different?
Well, the interesting thing about going all the way back to Babylonian astrology, and I don't know, for people who don't understand astrology, the planets move in an elliptic, in a band, and in the backdrop of the stars behind that band is what became the constellations, even though we see stars everywhere. And if you can see when you really get into Babylonian astrology, like the quadrant that goes from Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces was called the Great Sea. And some of the stories of the flood and a whale swallowing a man, or you can just see so many of our ancient myths and stories are actually coming from from ancient astrology, from what was happening in their eyes in the heavens. And so when you look at the 12 signs, they're a little bit different. I mean, you can see how they evolved like into Aries, like began with like the farm worker, and there's some really fun interaction with Inanna and plowing her field, and it's much more it's almost erotic. But but you get the sense of Aries being really kind of an aggressive male archetype. But when you get to something like Libra, it wasn't the scales, it was called ravenous dogs. And when you kind of go back through the story of that, you get a sense of where we get the word the hair of the dog, like and I hate, I mean, Libras love harmony in the environment, and sometimes they, when things are in discord or whatever, sometimes they can get into substances to kind of feel better, so there's kind of each sign is a little bit different, but you can see how the roots of it blossomed into what we know as more of like a Western astrology. So yeah, it's a bit different.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's
Yeah,
really fascinating. And so with kind of in the same area, but with these archetypes, do those also carry over? Because I think there are traditional archetypes. This is something that I've been, kind of noodling with personally, the mother, the father, the infant, the security provider in some circumstances. So do you feel that a lot of the same archetypal elements were alive and working in the population back then in the same way as they are now?
Yeah, because I mean, if you look back to like Egyptian mythology and Isis and Horus, her son, who was a king even in in his egg, or, you can start to see some of the Mary and Jesus, and which came kind of later. And you see kind of, so then like the virgin that's Virgo, or the mother that becomes kind of fifth house, stuff in astrology. You definitely, and the thing, like when I do I Ching interpretation versus like tarot interpretation, that's like East versus West. And, they have real similar archetypes, except the I Ching is based more on nature, natural processes as the universe moves towards change. And then in the West, it's more of this dramatic story that fits more to what you're talking about, the different characters, the Empress, and, you get more of, those are the Western archetypes. That's kind of what we've made out of this hero's journey in kind of a tarot reading, where like the I Ching would feel more like working with a Zen master.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, because I've done so much work in comparative mythology, religion, I've seen a lot of, like, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the ancient Sumerian work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Have you ever read any of that?
It's like tickling my brain somehow. Like I've heard of it before,
Yeah.
but
So
okay.
like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you can see a lot of the stories, and of course this goes back, 2000 BC, way before we think the Bible was put together or whatever. But there's a flood story in there. There's a story that resembles the Tower of Babel, and so if you kind of go back through all of our ancient ideas all around the world, you start to see the roots and also the similarities. Because in my opinion, because astrology was so prominent prior to, let's say the illiterate spoken word, sharing, writing, whatever, I feel like that may be why some of our myths are so similar around the world, like the flood story, or because they're, that totally comes out of some of the writings about what was happening in the heavens.
Mm. Oh, I love that parallel, because that's a thing too that has just really kind of come up as a stream of consciousness kind of thought, that we have so many similar stories all around the world, and it's just the storyteller who has kind of bent in a way, or
Uh-huh.
reorganized the story in a way that kind of fits the culture or the time that they're living in.
Right. Or even politically, to kind of
Yeah.
control people with the narrative. Yeah, the ideas. In fact, I would say all of the books that I've written, a lot of the work that I do, and I also compose music, and I'm meshing different like vibes from east to west, or everything I do is like really to transcend boundaries. And so, like one of the books I wrote, The Mythology of Sleep, which looks at mythology around the world for dream interpretation, because there's a lot of symbolism that that you learn about, how to interpret dreams from going through kind of the hero's journey through these myths and through dreams. But you see that they, I mean, I think the big takeaway is that we're all telling the same story. Like we're not so different.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're looking at Nordic mythology, or ancient Chinese, or there's definitely. So I kind of like, I know today, because of the internet and social media, a lot of those boundaries have come down, and I see a lot of that with astrological significance in planets moving through Pisces, and the melting pot, and sort of allowing religion to have a different, or let's say spirituality, allowing spirituality to rise out of the boundaries of religion that we held in the past. Does that make sense?
Totally,
Yeah.
because and you're also because it seems like we have a very similar backdrop for our work, and um you also work with like nature symbolism and interpreting signs kind of in a very natural and flowing way as well too, right?
Right. And that, comes from a lot of the work that I've done in Taoism, and translating some of the ancient Chinese ideas, which are just absolutely brilliant. And you get a sense then of Taoism being the ability to go with the flow, the ability to hover at the doorway of perception and observe and not, get pulled in. And so, yeah, like as I'm painting my interpretations, whether it's tarot or I Ching or astrology or whatever, I'm always working with the concept that for billions of years, nature has been building something better. And we showed up kind of seconds ago on the geological time scale. And yet, we're breathing it without our control. And so there's this flow with the universe where, our bodies shiver when we're cold and we sweat when we're hot. And we don't have to think about it because the flow is moving through us. And so it's kind of like, to me, nature is the pinnacle. And some people could call it God or some orchestrating principle. It really doesn't matter how we define it. But what I work to do is to show that when you really look at natural processes, you start to see that the human journey is not outside of nature. We're not better than, we're not different from, and so when we can compare ourselves to nature, you start to really have a more of an appreciation for the things that unfold. Like, for example, I have a video channel, Nature is a Guru. And one of the things that I did maybe 4 or 5 months ago was it was called The Viruses That Made Us Human. So like we could be standing in the middle of coronavirus and feeling like something very destructive is going on. And yet you look and the placenta came from a virus. There's synapses, there's things that happen to us. The way that we evolved required viruses because viruses are the only natural entity that can break through cell walls, can break through plant walls, human cell walls. And so some mechanisms, even sexual reproduction, is believed to have come from a viral origin. And so while we're standing in the middle of coronavirus, we can say, well, if we've evolved from these virus sort of mutations that allowed us to become better, we don't know what this whole, thing was, but we can trust that nature knows what it's doing. It's been doing it forever,
Right, right. And I love that too, because it shows there have been subtle changes in thinking and the way we go about our business and everything that are a result directly of COVID. And
Mhm.
and
Which brings up an interesting thing about dreaming, because we spend our days going through, moving towards conformity, giving up our authenticity to fit in. We join groups because of the ways we're alike, but we really discover how we're different. And so like half of our life is spent conforming, and then half of our life is spent in a state where all the walls are torn down. And I feel like the virus, played a big part in getting everybody back to their authenticity because they got to work from home, appreciate family more, maybe tap into their own little unique way of wearing their socks, or whatever it is. Does that make sense? Like kind of, what kind of things did you see from the virus that were subtle changes?
well, exactly what you're talking about, like just because it seems like we were marching in an inauthentic and kind of synthetic world.
Mhm.
And I was talking with another girl about this morning, where we weren't honoring the down cycle.
Right.
Everything had to be growth, movement, more,
Ag-
harder, longer.
Aggressive,
Yeah,
not in flow,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and then, bim bam. And, there are those people that are like, no, this was man-made. And it's just like, no, this is nature responding to, our own, it could just be a natural part of the cycle of nature. And
It is.
yeah.
It's exactly right. Like you call it, it's a down cycle. It's the big dream. Half of our lives we spend in a down cycle. And, and it's beyond us because aspects of ego and logic are suppressed. The body's paralyzed. Everything that we witness in our dreams feels like it's as real as what we experience, and there's a lot of really great guidance that comes out of that state, and it's not anything we're aware of, right? So it's kind of like if if nature sort of it designed us to have this down cycle every day, yeah, maybe it had to look at society as a whole And it's done this over and over, you know. I think
Mhm.
we're learning a lot. Oh my God, this whole Ukraine thing, I know it's tearing everybody apart, but we're also learning a lot from it, you know, like we can't just like look over the rim at a group of people and throw them weapons and watch, you know, we have to do things differently. We've got to get back to peace, and it might require, you know, giving up, you know, portions of the east of Ukraine, or that, you know, Crimea, which is already, it's like what, you know, it's like we just can't be so quick to respond and be holding up our way of governing as the best way or only way, or, you know, and it's a very ugly thing. But somewhere in all that, you know, look at what we're going to do with natural resources. Like, you know, we couldn't get away from our dependence on destructive, non-sustainable energy sources. And now we will, you know, every country is going to have to like really explore a better way of providing energy. So it's always looks bad, but that's the piece of nature that I have complete faith in, that we are a part of nature. Nature's evolving, it wants to be better, and we get pulled into it, and we are going to go somewhere better.
Right. Well, and I love the fact that you brought up our dependence on, fossil fuels and
Mhm.
unsustainable sources of energy. I live in the middle of a bunch of wind farms. And then not only do we have the wind farms here, then when we drive to my in-laws house, there's just, from the time we moved here about 15 years ago to now, they've massively increased their solar fields as well. Um, and it almost seemed like we had to have some kind of catastrophic push
Mhm.
to make any changes, because it was just almost like this. It was, I mean, I was just in America at the beginning of February and just was marveling at what percentage of the cars are like Dodge Rams and, like
Yeah, how big
really,
they are.
yeah, yeah. And we over here are, my regular car is just a tiny hatchback, and
Mhm.
now we're going to get an electric one, and we're moving forward on our solar panels a lot more
Mhm.
quickly. And we were going to do this stuff, but this geopolitical unrest has
Mhm.
really kind of increased the urgency for us.
Right, and I don't know if you were around back in the 70s, but a similar cycle occurred when there was, you know, a lot of, yeah, rush to the gas station because we, you know, everyone thought oil was going to be pulled. I think we had like the hostage crisis, or it was
Mm.
when Carter was president. And immediately, if you look, all the cars that started to come out of the factories were smaller, you know, and so it's like, you know, every generation just grows up, me, take, and it does take these sort of painful experiences to get our priorities straight.
Right. I wish that we would, I've just been, there's a part of me that just has been totally, probably naively wishing that human beings were beyond war, and that we
Oh,
could
I know.
finally be in a place where it's just like, even if somebody were to like go off the deep end, so to speak, that that somehow we would bring it all back together, because humans are beyond that now. But like I said, that might be a naive you know
Well, you know, because I'm a Taoist, you know, which is always to respect a balance and not to live in any kind of extremes, like judging good and bad and right and wrong. And this is, you know, like it's kind of, you just sort of stay in a happy medium and don't rush to judgment. You know, you take in all sides of whatever without, you know, without having to declare evil and good and all that. You can kind of look at the situation with Russia and Ukraine and those areas, you know, like the way I would describe it is, what if in the United States, all of a sudden, all the Latin countries and specifically Mexico started to have, you know, Russian, what do you call it? Guns or whatever you call it, like artillery, or, you know, the whole NATO expansion threatened Russia, and Ukraine was kind of neutral in the middle. And I'm not, in a million years, I would never justify what is going on, the atrocities of what's happening in Russia's doing right now. But still, there, there could have been more of a respect for a country's insecurities, and the United States would have felt it if it was on their borders. So, when you say it seems like we should be past this whole war thing, we should have been listening a long time ago. We should have been more reasonable in some of the things that were happening. I don't know if you know, like, the history of this whole NATO expansion, but so I feel like maybe Russia was backed in a corner, and the way the world wouldn't respond with any acquiescence, maybe, so it's like, I wouldn't call this kind of an evil thing. I would call it a huge misunderstanding that has horrible, horrible repercussions. And the sooner we get to an understanding of everybody's sense of security needs, I think we'll see that we are a people that can get beyond war. Nobody wants this. Does that
Right.
even make sense? Do I sound really super unreasonable? But I mean, I don't even know how that comes across, because the last thing I would ever condone is what's going on. It's absolutely horrible. But I do feel that there are some things that we didn't kind of, we have to really listen, as well as, have our ideas, but also respect other people's needs. And
I see it a little bit different than you, but
mhm.
because like NATO wasn't actively courting the Ukraine at the moment. Um,
Well, but the United States was giving Ukraine weapons to fight Russia. What's the difference? It's the same sort of kind of, that,
but
right? The United States has been funding them
right,
militarily for a while, and NATO, and like, I think it was during the Clinton administration that some of those old Russian or Soviet countries just boom, 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 NATO, 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 NATO. And even though Ukraine wasn't going to be, um, it still looks like the West is supplying them with weapons. But anyway, I mean, I'm sure we don't want to continue to go down the political path when we have so much more intriguing stuff to talk about.
exactly. Getting back to, because there are some archetypes, because part of me was thinking too, like, just working with energy and the archetypes. There has been an archetype for war, or that aggressive tendency, because I'm thinking of Mars, for example. Just
Exactly.
And it's a common energy in human, history, we'll
Uh-huh.
say. So do you feel like that's like a shadow of who we are, or is it like a shape shifting kind of? Because
It's shape shifting, because I see it as an impregnator.
oh,
Because
ooh,
Mars and the libido, and the Aries, the sign, and everything that we would associate with that archetype. It not only is aggressive, defensive, proactive, but it's also the impregnator. I mean, that was what I was talking about in that Babylonian astrology, the whole idea of the farm worker plowing in Nana's fertile field.
mm,
It's very graphic. So you can say that war, can lead to transformation. There's actually an ancient Chinese saying that's kind of interesting, because it talks about how dissatisfaction lives in the north and revolution lives in the south, and they used to meet in the middle of chaos, from time to time, and chaos always, repaid them, or gave, was always hospitable. And so they felt like, well, this, what can we do to give chaos, something back? So they thought, well, men all have like ears and eyes and a mouth. And so every day they bored a hole into chaos. And on the seventh day, chaos died. And I know that sounds very Zen and weird or whatever, but the idea is that when you have dissatisfaction, if it's not addressed, it leads to revolution. And the chaos that's involved, is part of the change, like we see it when there's a natural disaster in nature. It looks very bad and evil, and but it's really trying to balance out water temperatures or remove blockages, or but with this little saying from this Taoist saying, it's kind of like chaos is without the eyes and ears, the ability to see and hear and communicate, and that you can, you'll always have that sort of chaos. I don't know if you even get that.
Well, in my interpretation of chaos is a little bit like more unexpected, or anything can kind of happen energy. Like it's not formulated in the same, it's
But from a
sporadic.
but from a physics standpoint, the universe is in chaos. Like we're called organisms. We're organizing the chaos
Mhm.
into something manageable and, useful, and we don't want it to change and we hold on to it. But if you look at the flow of life and nature and cycles, and it's always, it's some growth, structure, and then it starts to disintegrate, turns into chaos, and then growth, structure, disintegrates. So it's sort of the secular, cyclical energy that's constantly at play in the natural world. Like
Mhm.
as an example, if you took a box and just let atoms, kind of move randomly, they're going to go into like chaotic patterns or whatever. Like we see that from a physics standpoint, that the universe and entropy, like where the universe is driven towards entropy. So chaos is not a it's not a negative thing. It's a part
Right.
of the transformation, and which is like shadows and nightmares. People often write me when they're having a nightmare, and I'm like, yay, because a nightmare is the quaking of the psyche, breaking free from some sort of hold. Some part of them, is trying to have a voice or expression or whatever. So nightmares can be a positive sign that there's that growth is occurring. And so that's
Mhm.
where you get your shadow dreams or whatever. And so that's where I would kind of I get away from it, any identification that this is good or this is bad or this is evil or this is, shadows are bad, or you know what I mean? It's kind of like there's a rhythm, and we can be at different places on that cycle and call it bad, but then all of a sudden it changes. Oh, it's good. Oh, no, it's bad. We can be, like I always say, become the master of your response, hover at the doorway of perception, you know,
Right.
like let it flow because it knows where to go.
Right. Well, and I like that because it does give a purpose to something that I think so many people, and because nightmares can be so scary, or
Yeah,
bizarre.
right. And the fact that they're frightening, like I feel like the more emotion that comes out of a dream, and the more bizarre, the more likely we are to remember it. So those
Mm,
sorts, I would say, 98% of people don't even remember their dreams. And even though everyone dreams nightly, REM, rapid eye movement, is showing that brain activity, the wave that's creating the dreamscape. And we'll dream maybe 20 dreams or however many a night, even though we'll only maybe remember the one prior to waking. The ones that are loudest are the ones that we remember. And, and nightmares for that reason, you know, we tend to remember that and then maybe try to find out, well, why am I having this nightmare? A real good one is the stalker dream. A lot of very a lot of very professional women I've seen over and over in doing dream work with people will have a dream of some stalker trying to break into the house. That's kind of a nightmare. It's a repetitive dream for them, shadow, you could call it. And it's funny because I was with some woman one time at some function and she mentioned it. And I said, were you a black sheep when you were little? And, she just looked at me and, did you have to be a caregiver to your family because your mother was not available? Oh my God, how do you know that? Because I've seen it. I've seen this pattern of a very, you know, nurturing woman who had to do everything, but had some resentment. And so was called a black sheep. And so her mother may have like given her an identity that becomes a shadow that's not acceptable. And
mhm.
yet she proves herself and becomes super successful, and then she's having these shadow dreams. Well, that shadow is her, that side of her that just wants to be understood, integrated, come in and sleep in its own bed. And the minute that she sees it as that, she stops having the dream and starts to love the self and understand and have forgiveness for mom. Nobody's perfect, but whatever it takes to heal the wound that became repressed, which then becomes the shadow, that becomes a nightmare. Does that make sense?
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So how can people, like, do you feel like there's more wisdom to be found in our regular dreams and not only those really profound or very loud dreams?
Well, when I'm doing comprehensive dream work, I do all sorts of things. So sometimes I just do like an hour of coaching that might have one dream involved over a week. Or sometimes people get into serious dream work where I'm getting like 10 dreams a week,
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah. So I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, so I can see patterns and I can see, so we're getting something from all of our dreams. But what I do notice is that they're very repetitive. So it's kind of like, well, let's try to symbolize this conflict this way. And I'm saying, as who's ever regulating the psyche's growth is we, how, let's try to symbolize it this way. Okay, well, that's not working. Let's try to symbolize it this way. It's kind of like a repetitive, which is why oracles can be so helpful. I mean,
Mm.
if we acknowledge that some aspect of the mind knows us better than we know ourselves, when we dream, we're given clues, things that we're not aware of by day, that can help us if we analyze the dream to understand what's causing the conflict. And those bizarre symbols you mentioned are my favorite, because the psyche is ingenious. Everybody's got this enormous creativity to take a very complex idea, wrap it in some bizarre, a duck with a hat on, or, and then you break down, the different aspects of these condensed or homogenized, not homogenized, but hybrid, symbols. But, you get kind of the sense that if you give the psyche that credibility and approach an oracle with the same sort of like, okay, I want to be led, not like, I want to know, what is he thinking of me right now? But it's more like, you know what I mean? That same sort of respect and openness and innocence. You can get some of the same guidance. And I see that because when I'm working with people, they'll send me their dream and then they'll send me like an I Ching reading or what, a 3-card spread, and it's saying the same thing. It's uncanny, you know?
Mhm, mhm. Because I just opened, I have an I Ching book from, 20 years ago, and I just rediscovered it, and I just open it to a random page a lot of times and just see, point my finger at one of them,
Mhm.
and I'm always amazed at how like on point. I'm just like, "Ah, really?" Like it just
Uh-huh.
completely represents exactly the message that I wanted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things, people ask me all the time when we're talking about dreams, if they're so important, why don't we remember them? It's almost like it, I guess I would say that a teacher, right? Like teachers don't give you answers. They sort of
Mm.
engage your discovery mechanism or whatever. And if dreams were so easily accessible, why would we need to be here? Why would we need to have the daily experience? Like who knows what it's all about? But there's, for whatever reason, the dream, is changing. Let's say that there's like a renovation going on in the subconscious and unconscious, or deeper levels of the psyche that's happening in the dreamscape, and then they start to come into experiential reality, which is what synchronicity is all about. So synchronicity is understood to be that sense of when you have like a subjective experience, like some kind of inspired idea, something's going on in the mind, maybe from a dream, and then something plays out in the outer world. It's like, whoa, you get the sense of deja vu, or well, I dreamt about, a bluebird, and there's a bluebird that's sitting in the tree right next to me singing, or he's doing something that makes it seem more interesting than just, just dismissing. And so there's sort of like this connection between the inner and the outer realm. That's what we know as synchronicity. And so when we're working with our dreams and we're beginning to see how our psyche's being represented in all these symbols, you can start to see how we kind of construct reality, and the line separating, the inaccessible dream content from what we're doing here starts to dissipate. And synchronicity seems to really have an uptick for people that are really paying attention to their dreams.
Oh, interesting. Do you feel like that all connects with like the collective consciousness and like the
Well, I definitely think that there's a collective connection that
Okay.
we all share, whether you want to, like you can think from the Buddhist standpoint that we're all one, or, all these different manifestations of this thing trying to discover itself, or, all the different ways of looking at it. Yes, I see that people will dream of archetypes like Anubis, the jackal-headed Egyptian god, and know nothing about Egyptian mythology, but when you start breaking it down on their experience, like in fact, in this particular dream with this gentleman, there was the mummification, and it really became a story of his inavailability or lack, unavailability, I guess you'd say it, and he not being able to really express himself and achieve intimacy. And so that mummification, you start to see symbolically being wrapped and, not kind of available. And, so the story of the dream comes out, but where did that, jackal-headed symbol come from? So that is what Jung thought too, Carl Jung, that there is this shared reservoir. And I feel that way too, because like if somebody was really to say where astrology came from, our knowledge of astrology. And I've been practicing astrology as long as I've been interpreting dreams. My aunt was actually the astrologer to Ronald Reagan,
Oh, wow.
or actually to Nancy Reagan, but did Ronald Reagan's chart. And she taught it to me when I was 7 or whatever. And even though I can see all of these things that happen, like Venus, disappearing below the earth because of the way that she moves, gives rise to stories like Persephone abducted to Hades, or Kukulkan, the snake that goes in the ground and then flies over the sky. That was the planet Venus. So even though you can see a lot of stories coming from the stars, I believe our understanding of astrology actually came to us in dreams, that came to us when our consciousness wasn't so overwhelmed with logic and words and ideas. And, I feel like consciousness sort of from, like the consciousness of a 2-year-old would be akin to what we were like pre-literate, society, where we were probably had more access to those inspired realms. That would be what you would call the collective unconscious.
Interesting. Wow. And I mean, it kind of all ties together, and kind of like, if you're taking silly putty and you're pushing it together and you're pulling it apart, you're pushing it together and you're pulling it apart, because there are these strands that remain, and bring in elements of the various cultures and stories and philosophies and experiences.
And that's where life, can get really interesting when we stop thinking that we have to know the truth, or that we have to see, because it is like you're describing a kind of a facet. Like it can be timeless. It can be the beginning. It can be the end. It can be, there's all different ways of looking at what's happening, but it becomes much more fun when we allow it to really reveal that mystery to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When we don't have to like label it as it has to be this linear thing. We live, we die. No, I don't think so.
Right.
I think it's more fun to just go, stand at that threshold of awareness and be that child again, and open, access to the right brain, which could lead to more intuitive experiences, and, to be more in flow and trusting.
Well, and I think that's where we're at right now, and where we definitely need to like kind of open up to again.
Mhm. And I think we are, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, hopefully it stays open, because I get a little worried with, book banning and and kind of those things where um, it seems as if we're moving forward in this magical realm, and in these you know ways of communing with the universe around us, and I just don't want to lose that.
Mhm. But that's sort of like the yin and the yang, right? Like there's the yin might represent sort of the intuitive realm, and the being receptive and kind, or just that flow, right? And then yang is the aggression and the da, da, da. So at the same time that anything might be expressing yin, yang, the fact that yang exists alongside of it, like they need each other. It's kind of like the force and field of electromagnetism. Like you have to have the force creates the magnetism, and then the magnetism pulls the force forward, and you have to have them both. You know, does that make sense? Like the force could be seen as yang, and the field could be seen as yin, but it can't, that light won't travel without that, you know, interaction. And so again, it's like, even to speak about the part of our culture that is, you know, really getting more into yoga and being much more appreciative of the environment. And, you know, and then you've got this other side of the culture that wants to, like, you know, cause war, or, you know, wants to ban books or limit people, you know, fake news, or I don't know, whatever you know, it's like kind of like they have to be together. They kind of work together that way. That one can't really exist without the other, because perhaps if everybody was in this sort of utopian thing, it would stagnate.
Right.
You know, it would be, you know, so who knows how it. But I definitely see yin and yang constantly in all aspects of nature. The sort of, you know, the fields of weather patterns, and, you know, all these different things that are just interacting.
Oh yeah, and in a way that one needs the other in order to exist. Basically, it's like this 2022, like a duality, but the duality is actually a necessary thing with one.
Exactly, which is why we shouldn't be so quick to rush to judgment that something that's happening is necessarily bad.
Right.
It may be the painful part of the journey towards change or whatever, but, you know, I think that's the greatest lesson of somebody studying Taoism, is to be able to get to a place. And I think, you know, in yoga too, they talk about getting beyond judgment, or it's just not, it's an easy idea to conceive of, but it's not accessible
It's not
so
an
much
easy
in practice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in Taoism, I really see people get to that neutrality, and the
Right.
lack of, and there's no boundaries. Like I meet a person and they're suffering. Oh, are you in pain? Even though they're yelling at me and telling and saying bad things about me, they're in pain. What can I do? That compassion, right? Like the love, rather than picking a fight with them because they're having a bad day and, you know, yelling at me, or, you know what I'm saying? Like you just remove those boundaries. We're all in this together. And, you know, take away the boundary between the dream and the experience. What would life look like if you acknowledge both as being completely necessary for our growth, or the idea that we're separate from the people that we're meet? Not really. There's some shared, you know, propitiousness, let's say, that we come together and learn from each other, and kind of just that lack of boundaries and lack of rushing to judgment can keep us in a neutral space, which is ultimately kind of joyous, or at least not in pain, not suffering. And I mean, I don't think there's one person on this planet today that can wake up and read the news without a sense of what am I, you know, what happened now? I mean, it's very frightening, but at the same time, you know, it's gonna come to some change, and I doubt that it's going to lead to a nuclear war, because that wouldn't make sense to me in terms of how we're part of nature's movement towards growth.
Well, I'm knocking on wood and keeping my fingers crossed, because we're just way close to that. We're just,
I know.
yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, where I'm located would be, yeah, a part of
Yeah.
a interest. Well, yeah. So, like, do you think that there's a reason that we forget our dreams? Oh, you just kind of went over that, because if there wasn't this chasm in between
Well,
reality.
okay, but not really, because you bring up kind of a different aspect, right? Because we, if you think about it, everything that we're dreaming the parts of our psyche that are repressed. Like a person who's trying to quit smoking will dream of smoking, or
Oh yeah.
there's like, and so there's things about us that maybe we pushed away, like that example of that woman with the mother that she resented her mother and her mother called her bad, and she, represses something in the psyche or whatever. The fact that, the psyche has repressed all this stuff, and then whatever part that's repressing it is sort of like gets open when we dream, and all that content gets explored and processed or whatever. You can see it as the left brain versus the right brain. In dreams, we're more in our right brain. It's all symbolic and holistic. And so if when we wake up, if we shift back into the left brain again, or our everyday ego driven perspective, it didn't want to know that content that's being explored. It repressed it. It doesn't understand it. So it takes some work to take the symbols, be, kind of slow. So I say when you wake up, like think of just even one image, because there's so much repetitiveness going on, and then don't analyze it, just hold it, put it in a word. In fact, like I was by the ocean, and then as you wake up, you write down I was by the ocean, and you're not getting analytical, but then it's like, and there was, two deer that were on the left side, and the information can, will start to come back. But even if you only remember kind of like a red ball on the beach, you can, without analyzing it, write it down, and then give it a couple days. Like what part of me is being represented by a red ball on the beach, and little by little, it starts to clarify what it is that's being explored. So, I mean, just to answer your question, why don't we remember our dreams? That's why, mostly, that the side of us that wants to keep everything the same, doesn't like change, ego oriented, isn't going to be interested in dream content.
Mm. Okay, that makes a lot more sense then. And then, yeah, just the fact that you would slow it down, and you would only, because it always seems like you can only grasp that one little kern anyway of a dream after you wake up. And so to be able to, like, do you encourage people to keep a dream dictionary next to their bed, or
Not a dictionary, but definitely a diary.
diary? Sorry.
To write it down. And what I notice is that when people start to work with their dreams, they dream. Well, they say they're dreaming more, but they're remembering their dreams more. It's like once the psyche gets a piece of like, then the next, it seems like they start to remember their dream content more. And then they can go through periods where they don't really remember their dreams. I mean, we seem to remember our dreams more when we're going through major transformations or challenges. Then our dreams seem to kind of get louder, and we tend to remember them.
Yeah, that makes sense, because especially when you're going through transformation and change and everything like that, it is going to pull up those really deeply hidden, sometimes, beliefs, or those
Blockages.
yeah bricks in the wall, yeah, that
Exactly.
need to be kind of dealt with in order for a person to transform or to move themselves into the next level of their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's kind of like, and then they'll, like I said, as they start to write them down and give them that sort of respect, then they seem to remember more. But if they, even if they don't remember their dreams, and that's why if you look at my website, Cafe au Sol, it's got a lot of oracles, and the oracles are there. It started as a dream dictionary. In fact, when I was writing about dreams years ago, honestly, a lot of people didn't give them any credibility. I remember talking to a publisher in New York, and he was like, "Your book's about dreams? Oh, you must be from California." Like it was, and then when I put my dream dictionary into an app, of course, then the younger generation, who was the early adopters for apps, it was like in the top 10 at iTunes. So it showed, and this was back in 2008 or whatever, but it showed that the younger generation was more giving more credibility to dreams. And it's kind of interesting to me because I've always felt like it's half of the puzzle that, you know, how can you not pay attention to your dreams? But
right. And it's kind of interesting too, because you and I have seen the progression of this area of symbolism, dream interpretation, tarot, numerology, angels, the I Ching, you know, all of that becoming much more mainstream than it was, you know, 30, 40 years ago.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
so,
and I think people are being able to kind of quiet their mind and have, you know, a little dialogue with themselves, because that's really what happens when you go to an oracle. You know, you get like a, um, you know, okay, what can I learn today? And if whatever the oracle reading is, you know, like somebody who's very analytical or very not spiritual, or I don't know what you want to call it, might go, "Oh, that's just a bunch of nonsense." Well, it doesn't matter. Your reality is your reality, or, you know, but for people that are really wanting to expand their sense of authenticity, or, you know, the ability to move more in flow or whatever, you know, the oracle can provide insight into the same blockages that dreams are trying to work through.
mhm, that's a good point. Yeah, and I know that there's a school that uses these tools for like a divination, and then there's a school that uses them more for introspection and connecting with their higher self, and with this part of them that's seeking the answers in order to move forward.
Mhm.
And so,
Well, which kind of brings up kind of astrology, because if you look at, you know, like I explained, tarot
mm,
was more of like a hero's journey in Western archetypes, and the I Ching is more like working with a Zen master. Astrology is okay. It's almost like the individual rips of fabric of the universe at the moment of birth that is timeless. You know, then that placement describes the natal birth chart, which can, no, I read it like a language. It tells me of what their life path is about. And yet you put, you know, the planets keep moving in this backdrop, and there you get the transit. So one is introspection, you know, what is my life about? And the other is what's going to happen next week, or why, you know, like astrology chart can be really great when somebody's experiencing crisis and doesn't understand why. It can
mm,
reveal kind of what this little transformation is all about. And you know, so that's an oracle that kind of grabs both, you know, the idea that somebody's looking to understand their life path, and somebody who really wants to know when's the best time to make a move of house, or, you know, like to invest in real estate, or because it kind of comes, astrology has both.
right. Oh, that's,
Which I guess they all have both, but that's kind of a good example of using them both in one reading.
oh yeah, totally. Because you have that set, I don't want to say carved in stone, but you have that moment of birth, you know,
Mhm.
that doesn't change or shift or anything like that. And so you have that as the backdrop of the personality, or how the person would interact, or what their natural tendencies would be. I
Mhm.
probably would be the most um, proper way of saying it. And then you have what's going on in the moment and how those two interact.
Mhm. And the chart too, just for people who only, you know, see like everyday, uh, you know, read what's your sun sign or whatever. Like, you know, I can look in a chart and go, why do I see you counting in the dark? Because I see an aspect between Saturn and the 12th house and Mars, or, you know, like it tells a story that's so deep, you know, and they'll go,
Mhm.
oh my God, my father used to make me count in the corner if I expressed my emotion, or, you know, and that's exactly what the chart was saying, you know.
Oh,
So
wow.
when I described kind of what that, you know, birth chart looks like, it isn't just, oh, you have your sun in Libra, but then you do this way, or you have your moon in Aquarius here. There's the interaction, the angles between those planets, and the, you know, the houses that they're in. It's like CAT looks like something that meows, and CAB is, you know, that yellow thing that takes us for rides in New York, you know, or Like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, and C would be like the planet, the aspect is A. And so to me, it's like a language. I don't remember. Do you do astrology?
I dabble, but I'm not like super deep into it. And I think that's really because, with all of this stuff, the further in you go, the deeper it gets,
Mhm.
and so really discovering those aspects and how that would affect a person's entire, like you were saying, just seeing, what am I
The
trying to say?
parents are spelled out in
Yeah.
the chart. And that's another thing is like the chart can be really great to describe the early life so that you can, why did you choose that? How did those difficulties or challenges relate to really setting you on your own path? Or the chart can really describe why we chose the parents we chose or the certain,
Mm.
things that we had in childhood.
And okay, so not to be like, to also add a little different layer of depth, when you're working with a person's natal chart and with working with them in their life and advising them, are you also bringing in aspects of the Babylonian astrology as well to that?
No,
No.
because just to be clear, there's no real difference in the way a chart's interpreted based on the Babylonian. It's almost like when we were talking earlier about the mother archetype and can go back to like Isis and Mary and the Virgin, or it's the same kind of idea. I mean, by going deep into Babylonian astrology, you get at the root of the archetypes that became the signs. You can understand the planet energy a little bit more because it's just more information. But the actual interpretation of the chart is the same because I mean that the systems are a little different because they didn't have the same planets that we know of today. But the Babylonian astrology is more to get a deeper insight into the symbolism that became
Okay.
the archetypes of astrology.
Okay. Okay. I think I get it. So, but and yeah, I'm all like, wait a second here. I'm gonna clap. Okay. So basically then it's this, what would you say? It's not an evolution. It's just the fact that archetypes have been around for a really long time and they've influenced society from 2,500 years ago, from
more than
yeah.
2,500, like probably, and again, like I feel like they must have come to us in our dreams. We scraped it on a rock. Like if you look at Göbekli Tepe back to 10,000 years ago, there's 3 bags at the top of one of the monuments, and there's like the scorpion. There's a lot of like things, and you find the same bag on all these statues. They call them the man bag. That's another thing I talk about in my book. So, and then you see it on a sculpture from, Mayan in, Chichen Itza or whatever, like the little Kukulkan guy is carrying a man bag. And what's that man bag? And that's what I talk about in the book too, because there's a square in the sky. Well, you have to read the book, but there's these symbolisms that, and we're talking 10,000 BC, right? For that Ratnagiri, they call it the vulture stone. And but that, I mean, obviously the people that are working on the archaeology they're calling it a vulture plane with skulls. Well, no, it's not. It's the abyss that we know about from Egypt. It's the way the ziggurat and the sun, the rebirth of the sun and the Scorpio. And you can see kind of some of the astrological significance. So kind of, so I guess I would say the evolution of the archetype starts from probably we accessed it in more of an unconscious pre-literate phase. We drew it, we started to write about it. It got homogenized and changed as it traveled through cultures from Babylonian to Greek to Roman to the England, like, but the root is still there. And I believe we access it when we sleep.
Mm, mm. Yeah, at the root of human experience and everything that is lived and dreamed about.
Yeah, and the inspiration mechanism, inspire, like it's whatever that energy of inspiration that comes from within.
Right, Right. And so people can find your books on Amazon.com, right? And you're on
Right.
iTunes as well, or Apple, you have apps.
Yeah, I mean, I have apps on iTunes because that's where you get them. You know, I have my music is kind of all over Amazon, Apple Music, whatever, YouTube, and you know, all of that you can find on my website too.
Okay. And your website is Cafe, CAFE, Soul, AUSOUL.com.
Right,
Right.
right. Or
Oh,
search Kari Hohne, Hohne.
good idea too. So,
Mhm.
well, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and to share your fascinating information about dreams and symbolism and archetypes and how those things, and also just to give a little perspective about, centering in this particular moment in time and looking for the good that can come of this. So I appreciate that
Cool.
as well.
Well, it was really nice to get to know you as well and share our philosophies or
Well, yeah, thank you again. So today we've been talking to Kari with a K, that's KariHohne. And you can find her work at cafeausoul.com. This is Sue Ellis-Saller from Spiritual Business Spotlight, and we thank you all for your time and your energy and listening to us today. So thank you very much. And we'll put Kari's contact information and her website in the show notes. So you can just click through and get right over to her site and get access to her wonderful information and see about buying her book, Decoding the Night Sky, which is about Babylonian astrology. So thank you so much for listening. Take care.